want to know which planet was causing your suffering? How about Earth?
Hey everyone, BrandFlakes here, back with a new Eternal Return video. For today's video, I'm going to go back to what I did a while ago and try and analyze the gameplay of someone way better than me. For today's video, we'll be reviewing the rank 1 in EU, patreii, who I think is a CHIARA and a SUA player. Also, by the way, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. EU names always have some weird syllables going on that aren't typical to Americans, so if I'm using the wrong syllables, then please let me know in the comments. But yeah, so if you guys remember, in my tier list, I had CHIARA pretty low rank, but in EU, I think they regard CHIARA as a lot better. And I think the main reason why is because of this specific player here. So in this video, we'll be going over how this player plays CHIARA and see what we can gather from how they play that makes them so much more proficient than the average CHIARA player. We'll be going over their tactics, their special tricks, their general game plan, and see if we can kind of figure out a formula to why they're so good at this game. So I'll have their route on screen. It's a pretty typical factory, cemetery, hospital route. And I also have their augments just because I don't know much about CHIARA. So we'll just trust what patreii has on their augment page and go with that. So just in general, we can go ahead and speed through the beginning part. I'll be talking over the gameplay as I'm recording. So if I mumble or you see random cuts, it's because I probably flubbed something and I need to edit it out in the post-production. So very straightforward gameplay here. You can see that patreii has gone for a bunch of ice water and has also eaten their food early on just for space. And then when we first see this Emma, they actually immediately walk away, and that's more of the respect to the Emma and CHIARA 1v1 matchup. It's essentially a waste of time to engage with an Emma as a melee character, especially since Emma, at any point in the fight, can just walk away. So instead of doing that, you'd rather just group up a team or find more places to farm and not waste any time that way. And the reason why patreii has so many water stacks is because they are not running the red tree, which means they don't have access to endorphins. So I'm assuming CHIARA has a lot of SP costs, and that's the reason why we stack up so many of them early on, because as you upgrade your items, you'll get a lot of items and upgrades that naturally give you more and more SP regen, which then nullifies the need to have as many drinks. And so essentially, you have these drinks to have it just in case. So it's going to be our very first fight. We're going to see that patreii plays very passively until the enemy team decides to commit. That's the reason why patreii didn't bother ulting, and even now isn't ulting, because there's really not a reason to ult on what's essentially a guaranteed kill. CHIARA has some of the worst escape in the game. She is a very, very all-in character, and she essentially just has to run in a straight line towards or away from people. So there's no point in ulting in case you want to fight someone later. And this is going to be our first really neat trick of the game. We see the ISO already used E, and so what patreii does is he actually double taps his ultimate and immediately jumps onto the ISO so that he can land the chain and root the ISO, which is a really cool tactic, because if you guys don't know, CHIARA's ult range, the second activation, has a much longer range than the actual circle itself. We can actually go back and see the execution again while you guys enjoy the sound in the background. And what that means is that you can use it in these scenarios where you don't need the damage, you just need the gap close. And since patreii, it's still swinging the game to have rapier skilled, right? So he's going to need to use the ultimate in order to close the gap. And since we already know Isol has used the E dash, and we're expecting him to not use blink just because there's not a really good reason to, we're going to go ahead and ult. And then the moment we ult, we can see where he is and aim almost guaranteed E. So you can see here, look how instant this is. The moment patreii ults, it's already reactivated. And then they jump, land the E. Once the root lands, our rest of the team catches up, and we take an easy kill. And it is important to note that the way that dashes work in this game is that they follow dashes and blinks, or rather targeted abilities that will latch on to somebody. Like when you use an ability that dashes to somebody and deals damage, it will latch on to somebody who's using mobility away from you. So if you see someone, like let's say Luke is ulting or is queuing you, let's say a CHIARA is ulting you, you want to wait until the enemy models on top of you before you actually use your own mobility, because they'll just keep following you and essentially waste your cooldown. If it's somebody like Dialin, you could technically blink the ultimate, but then you just dodge it. So it's really any mobility spell that latches onto you. You really want to make sure that you don't accidentally waste your mobility spell because you're already being targeted by the dash. And that's what happened there with the blink. So very straightforward game here. Let me go and remove the vision before I forget. Very straightforward stuff going on here. I don't know why it's not letting me swap. vision. Jump someone else really quickly and see if that's the bug. There we go. So very straightforward. We didn't see anyone in temple. We saw no pings. So we're trying to go ahead and fight around the temple tree. Obviously, we're going to get it for free this game because we saw earlier with the full vision, no one else was here. And what patreii is going to do is that patreii is going to rush the force core for the persona, just because persona early game is very, very powerful. It gives you a lot of amp percentage that really jumpstarts your damage for early game. And losing the vigilante is really not relevant because the vigilante existed purely for the early game, just because it routed well and it gives you some base stats to fight with. So yeah, we can see that Patrick's inventory is very clogged. Basically one piece of food, which is kind of fine in the early game because you're hoping to win, or you can always just like grab a box if you really need it. But the rest of his inventory is gonna be full of cameras or other items you need for the rest of your build. Because all the fights went very smoothly, we haven't consumed the purified water. But again, the water is there just in case we need it, not because we'll always need it. It's much better to have too many stacks of SP regen in your inventory and then never use it, as opposed to needing them or having no SP drinks and then running out of SP and then losing a fight because of it. So all that said, we do see our teammates teleport away and die. It's totally fine because Stream and Pawn have had their wolves respawn. A bit after day 2 is when all these camps will respawn. So if you're in the area and your teammates have just died somewhere because they took an aggressive teleport to greed for an objective, totally fine. Just farm up. Maybe you'll get an objective yourself on these camps. But more importantly, you will get the weapon mastery. That's a guaranteed upgrade. So the early game for this game is pretty quiet. I chose this game instead of one that patreii sent me because I saw a lot of neat tricks that I think most CHIARAs, I mean, I'm not a CHIARA player again, but I wasn't aware of, even though I played the game for a while. Before we get into that, let's talk about this fight. So yeah, let's talk about that CHIARA trick thing earlier. But this fight is something that I thought was really interesting because it really goes to show how patient patreii is with the ultimate usage. So just off the bat, immediately, we see the Emma appear, and patreii will utilize all his abilities to jump the Emma immediately. But there's no ult being used because we aren't sure if the Emma is going to full commit, right? So the reason why we're fine with using our Rapier skill, our W shield, and our E is because these are much lower CD and non-committal spells. And also, by using these spells, we can do a lot of initiation with it and maybe bait the enemy team to fight us in return. So we see here, even now, we don't want to commit our ultimate just because this is a really tight corridor, and corridors favor the enemy team a lot more than our team. Elena, Aiden, Emma all love closed spaces. And we see now that our Sua is getting low, now we can hit the ultimate because we know for a fact the enemy team is going to jump into us to fight us, and our ultimate is going to get full value. Keep in mind that this is a losing fight, but this is kind of the patience you need to have with CHIARA ultimate in order to guarantee value, because the reason why I think CHIARA is weak for more newbie players is mainly because a lot of them will use their ultimate in very inefficient ways, and then it'll just be kited out and she'll seem useless. But the really good CHIARA players will save ultimate until they know they can get value, and you're forced to fight into her ultimate, which is almost her entire value. So while that fight was losing, again, it's a really important insight to see how exactly you should be playing these fights as this character, because we'll see that philosophy be carried through in every single other fight that patreii plays this game. Luckily, we are lucky enough to get the alpha for free, essentially, mostly because everyone else was in battle zones or in a different alpha area. And so patreii goes for the Tenos Monarch as a second upgrade just to increase that CDR, because having better CDR values is just really, really important. Now, we're only at 30% because Covert Agent Uniform is a 10% chest piece, but remember that we do have a next upgrade coming, and 30% is still pretty good. It's going to come about 35% once we upgrade our next item, but yeah, again, 30% is more than fine to start out with. So we do an aggressive TP into a yellow zone because yellow zones are usually not being occupied, and we're also just hoping that the respawns are active. Again, wolves will respawn almost halfway into every day or night cycle because they're like 180 seconds, and Nimble Neuron has mostly standardized the day and night cycle into like 2 minutes each about. So you should always have that in mind when you're rotating, because if you manage to catch a respawn, that's more weapon mastery, more experience, chance at RNG. So it's really good macro plays by patreii just to run around and take educated guesses and gambles to see where farm is, while also avoiding enemy teams. And we see here, we do see an enemy team. Speaking of, and again, we're not going to overcommit because we do have a Sua, Sua is a lot better at initiating and escaping than we are, so that's the reason why we see patreii being so comfortable with letting his Sua take all of the aggro instead of being the one to initiate himself. CHIARA is not a strong character for solo initiation unless the enemy team wants to fight into you, which is a fine idea, but if you let the enemy team fight into you, or if you're playing on that, you're often relying on the enemy team misplaying, which means your consistency is way worse. Now, we see the same team from earlier, or is this the same team? Yeah, the same team earlier. And another really cool tactic here is patreii using the chicken as a rapier target to explode the W on him. And then we see our Sua is going to initiate the fight, and we're happy to stand back and just wait to see what happens afterwards. And we're just walking away. We've committed some not super high value spells because, again, CHIARA is not a very harsh initiator. She is a diver character. She is a great counter engager, but she is not a character that you want to be the first in with because that means you'll take all the damage, your W shield's being popped, to burn totem early, and your team might not even be able to follow you. And if you have no team with you as CHIARA, well, you have to really hope that the enemy team misplays really hard, which is, again, not very good. So here we see the kiosk bot on the map, so that's why patreii runs in. And we have the blast cone here for safety, which is the reason why patreii feels comfortable playing up, because he can always use a blast cone to run away if really necessary. Also, people are psychologically less inclined to fight when they're ordering, so it's just it's a much safer scenario to be confidently walking up in. So we see the enemy team isn't really committing to us, and the scariest character on the team we currently have leashed with an E-chain. So that's the reason why patreii is able to play so aggressively, because CHIARA, if CHIARA ults too early, then we're alone. We can always totem the CHIARA ult, and CHIARA ult does have a forced duration, so we're expecting the CHIARA to not burn ult on just one person. Johan is a support, not very scary, so we've kind of CC'd the most threatening person, and so that's why we're okay with running up. And the moment the E-chain lands or finishes, you see patreii immediately backs up because the retribution of Dylan jumping him after his CC's over is very, very scary. So we're just going to play this fight nice and patiently. We have our Sua, but to back us up, we have our Jenny here to help us deal damage. And now since we have our teammates here, we can blast cone in, we can initiate. Our Sua is with us, so it's not a solo dive, and the enemy team is pinned against the red zone. And so there is an argument that the enemy team can run to red, but that's a very, very harsh resource commitment. So we're just going to assume that if they run to red, good enough. If they don't, they'll have to fight us. So therefore, my ult is good. So very straightforward fight. We'll see patreii leash to the Johan, because Johan is the priority target here. And also enemy CHIARA will have totem. So finding someone with totem is very low value because they can always totem and then heal back up. Unfortunately, the Johan abandoned his CHIARA, and we have Sui here with us, so we're pretty confident we can kill the CHIARA. And we'll see this ultimate or this totem here in response to the enemy CHIARA's ult, just to play it safe. CHIARA's ult does a lot of damage. We'll just go ahead and see the execute damage here. It's going to do a bunch of true damage, and it's going to do, I think it's up to 40% more true damage. Yeah, 40% more true damage up to 40% depending on how many stacks you have. So that's 356 true damage. 40% more is like roughly maybe like 550 damage, and we can see that patreii is at 600, and so this is just playing it safe. We don't know if it'll execute us, but we would rather not die and accidentally let the Dylan Johan turn the fight, so we're trying to totem to be safe. And the CHIARA ends up ulting the Sua instead, but ulting Sua is not a bad result. It's still a 3v2. The enemy team is going to be forced to back up, and we've taken out somebody, minus 250 them, and we can even chase them down if we want to, because we have a Sua, and Sua's chase is pretty solid. But yeah, another example of just playing very patiently and remembering to only dive if your teammate is within diving reach with you. So that time, patreii was able to go in, essentially, like, technically patreii started the fight, but it was because the Sua was right next to him. And since Sua is right next to him, the enemy team can't really fight melee of patreii, because if they do, Sua gains a lot of value, and Sua is very good against other melee characters that don't want to one-shot her because she heals so much over time. And also that comp, it's what? CHIARA, Dylan, Johan, like if Sua can heal through the initial burst, she's gonna do just fine. And so that's why they seem so scared of fighting. And I think the Dylan ended up going for a Jenny anyways, so it didn't really matter too much. So another little downtime here for this team, so we're gonna ×3 through it. We find a flare gun, we're gonna walk down the dock. We see that there's no one here, no pings, so we're trying to take Omega for free. Very solid boon. I feel like Omega is either insanely contested or not very contested, so obviously we walk down instead of teleporting there, just so they can take our time and clear behind us so that we know if it's actually safe to take or not. We get a prominence from our box. Pretty good. Direct upgrade to Tyndall's Monarch, and we're just gonna keep running around again. We see the console was taken, so we're super strong. We're just gonna run straight in. This Lennox ends up engaging, so since we know Lennox engaged and our Sua's gonna be engaging the other side, we have a decision to make. Do we ult now and just hit the Lennox, or do we want to use our Rapier skill to dive the people that have already burned cooldowns on our Sua player? Because again, Sua, a lot better engaging. Sua's also soaked a lot of cooldowns by now. And our W is down, but we do have ultimate up. So what patreii ends up doing is he ends up waiting out for his W cooldown and hoping the enemy team walks into him. And he's going to go ahead and start damaging the Lennox a little bit because he knows that the Sua and the Jenny can probably kill Lennox after he backs up. But he just wants to damage a bit, and since his ultimate up, you see that W reactivated, Q slams into the Barbara. He's gonna go ahead and totem because he sees all the turrets up, and it's AR ISIL. And this is really good because you can see how much damage the ISIL is not doing. Again, he zoned off the Lennox and had Lennox's defense shredded because of how CHIARA's passive works. Oh no, it's just a healing reduction now. I thought it was defense shred still. But anyways, the Lennox is just really squishy now because of the damage he did. And then he totems to deny the backliners insane amount of damages, and now this way, if he wants to, he can even execute Lennox, or he can continue diving in on MT. But here, we choose to execute the Lennox to make it 3v2, and then we're trying to keep diving, use ult again to jump the Barbara, and since we know our team's here, we can just use the Barbara, or jump to the Barbara before executing, because we know that the ISIL will have to run away, or they risk a full team wipe because they decided to take a 2v3 for no reason. So again, very good patience, very good spatial awareness of where everyone is, and it's just really impressive. I mean, obviously, like, toteming in the middle of people is not a very mechanically intensive thing to do, but it's knowing how to totem to generate the most value from totem, because it's not like you're healing, well, I guess CHIARA is healing, but it's not like you're actively denying damage if the enemy team doesn't want to be denied damage, but it's the threat of sitting inside your plague and the threat of you continuing to heal more that will deny enemy teammates from first harming your teammates, and second, getting value off of their characters. So that's really the value of totem. Like, again, you can see how patient patreii is with ulting because your ultimate is such a powerful tool, and really your character is not very useful without ult. Ultimate is how you zone people off, ultimate is how you do all of your damage, ultimate is how you have all your sustain, so you have to know exactly when to ult in order to make CHIARA look strong, and I think so far we've been seeing a pretty good example of that. Now, Wickeline is available. Wickeline's a pretty good spike. Again, we don't want to teleport into Wickeline if we were playing safe. We just want to walk towards it so we can see pings, know that behind us is supposedly clear. We see a ping now, but we have cams, so we'll see them entering cemetery if necessary. But we don't see them enter, so we're going to go ahead and clear Wick, craft our items, and then probably run towards the pings if we want to, just because we have Wick buff and we're super strong. Now, the only downside of Wick buff is that nobody will want to fight you. I think Nero said this best in a stream that he had recently, where having Wick is kind of like your free ticket to temp zones, because Wickeline buff only lasts long enough to reach temporary zones. It is a very, very rare occasion that you actually get to have a high value fight with Wick, and often fighting with Wick doesn't even mean that you'll win the fight. You might get third party because, again, you are the quote-unquote strongest team. So Wick is more of a safety buffer to make it to the end, and we'll see patreii. They're gonna be looking to pressure teams and get value where they can, and we'll see this team just tries to immediately walk away, but since they have nowhere to go, they have to fight, so they turn. And so again, before I got distracted by my incessant yapping, sorry, I probably should have waited out the silence earlier. I didn't realize it was gonna be so loud. So anyways, where were we before I got distracted for like 2 minutes on my end? So yeah, Wickeline, as I said a second ago, usually you don't want to fight it, but since this team is pinned back, they will want to fight it. So we'll see here that patreii will immediately ult because he sees the Magnus is going in, he sees that this Nikki wants to go in, so he ults immediately to immediately gain value, dives the Carla, and essentially isolates a 1v1 between the Jenny and the Nikki, which is much favored to the Jenny because Jenny has passive and can delay it longer. So that's the reason why you see the aggressive trade here, and then now Carla having to run into the zone because of the red zone behind her has to just die immediately to the other two Riot Divers. Now we see the issue here is that now we're now being third-partied, so we're gonna have to make it's a really tough third party, but patreii actually sits back and waits because he knows his ultimate's coming back up, and then with the ultimate available, manages to turn a pretty insane fight. Basically wipes the Johann and then kills the other person with the next ultimate, and it's a very clean team wipe. So we can see again the emphasis on how important CHIARA's ult is to every fight. Thankfully, we had a Jenny there to tank the damage with us when we were like waiting in the red zone, because Jenny was lower, so instead of focusing the CHIARA who had a lot of HP, the Dylan had to focus the Jenny who technically has better damage output and is technically the right choice, but because of that, couldn't end up taking down patreii for the final kill. So we can see again the problem with the Dylan, CHIARA, Johann comp is that their damage does run out, and since CHIARA and Sua are both very good sustained characters, if you can't kill everyone in your first go, it just looks really bad. And so because of that, we just see this team end up getting a lot of value. So we chase the Magnus team into red, and now this is another issue. We are against red ourselves. Patrick's gonna try and run in and gonna try and kill the Magnus, but we fail. And so since we know this team right above us and we know Magnus just walked away, this is really scary. We have no resources, we have no ult, we are against a zone that we can't walk through because we have no red timer. So the reason why we sit here for 20 seconds is because we just need to play it super safe. We know there's no cams here, there's no CCTV, no cameras, so it's much safer just to like wait those 15 seconds and guarantee we don't get punished for having no cooldowns, as opposed to actually just running in and dying potentially for free and going fifth in a game that we could go first in due to how far ahead we are. And so another sin of being a Wick team, there's a hyperloop in stream, so everyone's going to leave our zone. So sadly, this means that the next few minutes are just going to be very, very quiet. No kills, but we do make it to the final zone, essentially for free. There are no hyperloops in Cemetery, so that more or less guarantees that nobody will be coming to feed us free kills. So the other temporary final zone is going to have a massive party while we sit around and do nothing. But on the bright side, that means we can save a lot of our cams and traps for the late game. We see that patreii's inventory is 4 telephoto cameras and 4 recon drones. And we see the enemy team. We haven't seen this team all game, but it's going to be Estelle, Isol, and Irem. Kind of a more divey comp, or it can be much more divey. So we're going to see how patreii handles it. And what we're going to do is actually camp the blast cone. And that's really important because Irem and Estelle are very good anti-dive characters. And so what this ends up meaning is that if you're going to walk up to those two characters, you are very easily kited out and poked. So we're going to see what his team does instead while he waits. We can see everything here. This is probably how patreii's camera looked. I'll zoom in just to have the proper view. But we should be aware that patreii can actually jump to around here. So we see Irem jumping in, and we see patreii has actually moved a little bit to get a slightly different angle so that once the fight actually starts, he can jump in right behind the enemy team. And the enemy team has to go into hospital because that's where the final zone is. And so we'll see patreii just biding his time. The enemy team knows that CHIARA is lurking. That's the reason why they aren't immediately jumping to Sua, but they have to go in at some point, right? So his teammates are playing a very, very good job of forcing and kiting and baiting cooldowns. So we finally see the Irem go in, and we see patreii looking to spring his trap. Once again, we need to wait for the perfect timing as CHIARA. So we see here, the trap is triggered. We are right behind the 2 enemy damage dealers, and we essentially immediately ult. It got cancelled initially because of the buffer, but we ult immediately because we know it's going to be a good fight. Unfortunately, the enemy team does counterplay it very well, and our ultimate still does all the damage to the Estelle, so it's not a completely wasted ult, right? And since the Estelle felt obligated to fight us, we end up just doing a lot of damage, and the Isol fell to the trap of the fact that CHIARA can ult whoever she wants. So let's go and zoom out and just follow the entire fight. Again, we see that patreii probably wanted to mash ultimate after the E, but got CC'd out of it. And we can see that he's been pretty desperate to use ult, because we see that he immediately ults, immediately rapiers to keep on top of the Irem. Irem, pretty good player, kites it out because she knows what the goal is. I would say the main misplay here is the Estelle choosing to fight the CHIARA instead of immediately dipping. So we see here that because of the chaos that patreii started, the Isol lost all of his protection between the Estelle and the Irem. So that means that the Sua and the Jenny can actually dive the Isol. And the Isol is pistol Isol, so they do have some pretty good self-escape options, but you still aren't going to run away from another pistol user and a Sua if they're really committed to catching you. So the Isol almost dies. Sua takes a lot of damage for it, or Sua takes a lot of damage and is forced to dip out, but Sua has done her job. And we're going to see patreii with really good awareness sees the Isol. Again, you can ult anyone you want with as long as they're within range. So patreii sees the ISOL, immediately ults, really good awareness, and then ults back to the SL and takes them out. Now it's just Irem left. Irem takes their free Sua kill, tries to trade out patreii, but patreii's shield is really massive, and with that, patreii wins the game. So yeah, a bit more rambly than I would probably like it to be, but it's been a while since I've done these videos, but I hope it was helpful. Patreii is a very good player, and I'm not really a CHIARA fan, but it is pretty inspiring to watch that. And unfortunately, it seems there's no victory screen here, so I'll just end the video here. Let me know if you guys want to see more of these. There's a lot of really good players on every character, or most characters in both NA and EU. And so if you guys want to see how they play their games, just let me know character names or players in the comments, and I'll try my best to just review them, because these are technically a lot lower effort than the usual videos, because I just yap and then I cut down some random parts and then post it, right? So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Have a good day or night, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.